South Africa has finally concluded the elections with all votes counted and tallied as of yesterday. Well, tonight at 6 p.m. the IEC will make a declaration of the results, and we're going to discuss all the issues that have come up relating to this period. And for that, we are joined in studio now by political analyst Sanet Solomon. Sanet, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
How are you feeling after the past few days? It's been a busy few days.
It has been. I think it's a very exciting time for us, and I think for some it's a more stressful time.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that today is supposed to represent really is a culmination of all the work that's being done by the country and certainly by the IEC when that announcement takes place at 6 p.m. But last night, we saw a bevy of political parties alongside the MK party, parties such as the South African Rainbow Alliance, the ACT, the IFP coming out and saying that, well, there should not be an announcement of the results today. What do you make of that? Is that democracy in action, or is that threatening, you know, I suppose, how these elections play out?
I think the IEC has approximately 7 days before they have to make the announcement, and I think that we are still well within that time frame, and I think that's why those political parties are coming out and asking for possible recounts or reconsiderations and concessions to be made. And obviously, while the IEC would like to conclude the matter, I do think that given that we live in a democratic state, you're more than able to actually ask questions and engage, and I think that we still have a bit of time if that's something that they are open to considering. But I think it speaks to the health of a democracy when you can actually make such requests.
Do you think that there'd be a message sent, though, if the IEC then does go ahead with the plan to have that results announcement at 6 p.m. this evening?
I don't necessarily think that it would be a bad thing, even if they proceeded, because the rule says as soon as it's possible. So if they feel that it would be in the best interest to conclude this, then they are more than allowed to actually conclude the matter. But what would be interesting is if they conclude the matter and there is a number of unhappiness, etc., we might have a lot of appeals, and I think that that might cause a long-term problem.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at the political parties that were raising this issue, right? I mean, the MK party, some would argue, has done considerably well in this election, taking the majority, for instance, in KZN. But other political parties, perhaps not so much, right? The South African Rainbow Alliance, you know, really struggling. I mean, Colleen Makubela talked about it on Channel 405 yesterday, about how she's also quite disappointed by the results that they've gotten. And during that press briefing, one of the things that she talked about was that this approach of all these political parties coming together, wanting these disputes to be addressed, is not about them being upset about not having performed well in these elections. I mean, do you believe that?
I think so. I think I was quite surprised at the MK party coming out. I mean, they are the overall, I would say, winners in terms of this election, just coming out of nowhere, being a few months old, and then garnering that support. I think in terms of the other parties, it could be perceived as possible unhappiness because they didn't perform as well as they thought. And I think if you have such requests, there should also be reasons why you would want a recount. Was there something that you were unhappy about? Were there disputes that you had, and were these lodged before the time frame of 9 o'clock? I think it was 9 p.m., etc. And I think that if you have valid reasons to have doubted the outcome of the results, then I think that's more than welcome. But unless you have valid reasons, it could just be that at this point in time, you are not necessarily what the electorate would like, and that they have made their choice.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I think is certainly questionable at this point is whether or not the IEC still holds the high integrity that it's been lauded for across the world. Has that been dented?
I don't think so. I think that there have been a number of observer missions who've obviously given their preliminary statements. I think yesterday it was your Civic, it was as well the African Union. There were other independent election observer missions and so on, and none of them have actually indicated that they questioned the way in which the IEC dealt with the matter. I think that this is because it's all often referred to as the most contested election since democracy. I think that that's why the IEC has been in the spotlight so well, or so much rather. They have managed to deal with individual issues as they've arisen. And I think that in the run-up to the next few weeks, we'll still see a lot of people questioning whether certain things happened, how they played out, and so on. And I think that is not necessarily something bad, but I don't think that we have a reason to question the work that has been done by the IEC unless someone is able to provide actual evidence, tangible evidence to support such a claim. I think that to a large extent we can say that we've had free and fair elections.
I mean, we must also talk about the wording that was used by these political parties as they held this briefing, right? I think it's very important. And also, you know, some would argue concerning, but we've also been looking at a few tweets to see how South Africans are looking at some of the issues that have come up during these elections. Dr. Sithembile Mbete has tweeted a thread about vote counting, voting district equals voting station. Number one, the SA uses a system of manual counting. Votes are counted manually at each VD. What we see at the Results Operations Center and online is not counting as the declaration of verified results. So I think this also speaks to the sort of a civic education that is necessary, right? And there's been a question around whether or not South Africans have been educated sufficiently around even how the results and votes are processed. I think it's an important one because when you have political parties raising issues around the counting, you need to have an argument that says, well, this is actually what happened through that process.
I think so. I think that this is actually a key point, and I think it's something that has been raised substantively over the past few days. I think that Dr. Mbata is spot on in terms of just clarifying that, because I do think that there's a lot that people don't know. I think, moreover, there's a lot of people who actually don't know that the IEC have been running like a number of seminars and workshops over the past few months, and these have been intense. But I would also say that given how restricted they've been in terms of their own budget, I think that also puts a limitation in terms of the number of workshops you can host, how deep into rural communities you can go, because I think those are more accessible to people who go to university, people who live in metros and so on, because you are well informed about that. But I think if we capacitated the IEC more in terms of obviously resources, human capacity, etc., I think that it would be able to do much better. But I also think that one of the things that the different political parties should take into consideration is the extent to which that budget has been cut and how that impacted in terms of these training opportunities. Yeah,
well, we're going to keep looking at a few tweets. The Star newspaper has tweeted, why are some votes not a secret when cast but become so when counted? This is a question raised by Jacob Zuma, the leader of the MK. We've got a video to play on that as well. Take a look.
Elections are done. Why should they, at some point when you vote, is not secret, but when people count, it's secret? Why? Yes. Why? And part of the reason, all of us, I can tell you, we are going to be on the same side in changing this country. So that we've got a country for our children. Elections are done.
All right. Yeah, there it is. And that's the former President Jacob Zuma leading all those parties. And you see Ace Magashule there of our ECT standing behind him as well. And some of the political parties that are also wanting these disputes to be looked at, asking for the results announcement not to take place today. But I want to quote some of what he said as well. Zuma said the declaration of the outcome of the elections, he said, is tantamount to provoking his new Umkhonto weSizwe party. Provoking. What does that mean?
I just think at this point it's just politicking. To be honest with you, it could also be that he would like the support of other political parties, like post this election, and I think that that could be why he is in support of this, because logically it doesn't make sense for a party that has done so well to be contesting like the outcome and or wanting to cause possible delays given how well they've done, particularly because they've now secured KZN.
Yeah, you know, you've got to, though, think about that wording, especially when it comes from former President Jacob Zuma, because we do still have, you know, a little bit of that trauma from July 2021.
True, true. I think that one of the things that political parties should also take into consideration, as you rightfully mentioned, is word choices. Those tend to invoke emotions out of people. I think they tend to make people act out of what they would normally do. And I think that he's always been very clear about what he wants to do. But I also think that he is a formidable chess player, and I think that politics is a game of chess. And I think that we won't necessarily see what his end goal is just yet, but I definitely think that there is an end goal. And I do think that South Africans are traumatized based on what happened. I think a lot of people lost their jobs. There were small entrepreneurs who had businesses that they had to close down. We know that the insurance company that obviously, I think it's Sasria, that covered the insurance claims, etc., suffered immensely. And I think that those things still live freshly in a lot of South Africans' minds. And I think as a political leader, you need to be more responsible with your choice of words. I think you need to be very responsible in terms of how you address certain matters. And I think that knowing South Africa, because the former president is a former president, he needs to be more mindful of how he navigates the next few days.
Yeah, it's Sasria, in fact, you talk about just how much damage Sasria took, the state insurance organization. I mean, we spoke to them just last week, and they talked about, as a result of July 2021, they're not even finished paying all of those claims, 99% of the way in, he said, and it's cost them over 31 billion rand. I mean, can we get some of those that kind of cushioning back again? That's a question that needs to be asked. So stability, really, really important. Let's look at more tweets. Khalili says, Kiakili. It says, patriotic leader Gated McKenzie wants Department of Home Affairs. He's adamant on Abahambe, #election results. Watch this video.
The party that's friendly with illegal foreigners. We are not going to change that stand. We will have 9 votes in the National Parliament, in the National Assembly. Those 9 votes will decide who becomes president. And if people have not looked at the result, those 9 votes, and to get those 9 votes, all these illegal foreigners, they must go. And we are not going to trust another party in that portfolio. I heard Mr. Malema saying he wants finance. We don't want finance. We want Home Affairs. So if you want to talk to us, start with Home Affairs. We must give EFF finance, but PA, Home Affairs. And we have another one extra, police. So once we have caught them, we take them out of the country. But Home Affairs for us is number 1.
Mr. McKenzie, do you think this Abraham is
the party that's...
Yeah, there it is. I mean, so 2 questions, right? The first thing that comes up for me is when you speak to the political parties, and certainly as we've done this week, right? And you ask them, what is it that happens during these coalition talks, and how is it that you make, decisions about who you work with? And they say, no, it's the policy first, right? We look at which parties we align with from a policy point of view, and certainly not just the positions. But here you hear Gated McKenzie already starting to say, well, that cabinet department and that department, this ministry. So you speak to that, right? Just how honest are political parties when they really talk to us, the public, about how they decide on their coalition agreements. And then, of course, the Patriotic Alliance wanting Home Affairs. A good idea? A bad idea? I mean, they've stood by their position on how they want to deal with illegal immigrants.
I think one of the key things that you rightfully mentioned is a lot of it has to do with bargaining. I think in this instance, the Patriotic Alliance has done a lot of messaging and campaigning around not wanting to have illegal or undocumented, rather. I think that would be a more neutral word to choose, an undocumented foreigner in the country. And I think that obviously it could have to do with the fact that the South African economy isn't growing, that there are a number of South Africans who don't have jobs and so on, and that there are a lot of South Africans dependent on undocumented people to do that labor because you can pay them less.
Yeah.
And I think that obviously resonates with quite a number of people, especially people who find themselves in a more marginalized position. In terms of allocating that specific department to them, I think that it could be quite dangerous because what we don't take into consideration is how it would impact on our foreign policy. Right. If you start evacuating, say they get police and they get Home Affairs, it matters how you deport people. If you are able to do it in a more dignified manner and work with other foreign governments, then you can say, okay, we have 50 people that have to return to Zimbabwe. This is how we're going to be working through it, etc. It's a matter of sensitivity and it's a matter of respecting other people's human rights. While the person isn't legally documented to be in your country, you still have to treat them in a dignified unified manner. And I think in that instance, it would be much better to give that specific office to a political party that isn't as intense in terms of dealing with that, because I think that they may be able to work with neutrality in terms of that matter. So maybe give them Deputy Minister of Home Affairs and give someone who is more neutral and who is able to have a better relationship with other African countries, that position, because I think that if you don't deal with it in a sensitive matter, it will impact on your relations with other African countries. And that would have major implications in terms of how other South Africans, because there are millions of South Africans working in other African countries, are also treated elsewhere.
Yeah, really good point. All right, let's see one more. TK Nala says the ANC chairperson, Gwede Mantashe, became emotional and told journalists that they are not proper journalists. And then laughs and says it's over. Let's hope that pensioners like him will not be in the new executive. Hashtag SA Elections 2024. Watch this video.
No, him. Let me help you. The problem with you is that you are not proper journalists. You are looking for faults. That is bad journalism. Okay, stop it. Do proper journalism. Be ethical. No, him. Let me help you.
Listen, I mean, tongues were wagging about this, right? What do you say? What do you think when you hear political leaders start to speak to journalists in that way? I mean, it certainly isn't Gwede Mantashe alone. Julius Malema held a press briefing yesterday as well, where towards the end there he started talking about different media houses and how they've covered his campaign, his election. But the position that political parties take, political leaders take against journalists, what does that show? What does that say to you?
I think people don't realize the extent to which journalists are verbally abused, and verbal abuse is abuse. There have been a lot of instances where even female reporters would be pushed or shoved aside, where they would be verbally assaulted by these political leaders. I think one of the things that we should note is that there's a code of conduct for journalists, and they are held to a certain standard, and there are certain things that you have to take into consideration when reporting, and obviously, there's also a professional body managing this and also checking into it. I think as a political leader, once there are things that you don't feel comfortable with, don't personalize the information that is shared, because as journalists, your job is to share information. Your job is to make sure that South Africans know what's happening in the country. And I feel that if there was an instance where a political party believed that a certain media house was targeting them or wasn't reporting fairly, you can report that. So the question is, have they reported it, and how was it dealt with?
Okay, well, one more tweet. Okay, IOL News tweets, the ANC, DA, MK, EFF and IFP will be the top 5 biggest parties in the National Assembly. So what they've done essentially is give us a little diagram there with the National Assembly seat allocation, saying that they'll be joined by the Patriotic Alliance, Action SA, Freedom Front Plus, ACDP, UDM, Al-Jamaa, ATM, BOSA, CCC, Rise Mzansi Good, PAC and UAT. But look at that seat allocation diagram that they've essentially given us. The yellow that you see on the left there, obviously being the ANC, the DA there being in the blue right next to it, the green being the MK party, the red being what is quite a slim EFF seating there, and an even slimmer IFP seating. And then you've got, you know, the little bit there at the top, the green little bit at the top there being the Patriotic Alliance. Underneath that, the Freedom Front Plus and Action SA getting only 5 seats, 160 seats for the ANC. This is really interesting. Do you think this is accurate?
It's very difficult to say because I haven't crunched the numbers just yet. But I think it's very possible. But I also think that it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think one of the things that we have to move beyond is having a single party dominate in Parliament, because then you don't actually have people making decisions based on accountability, etc. So you can just vote the party line. But if you have something like this, then different people would then weigh in, and the voting would look slightly different, which means that we have better accountability. So I don't necessarily think that this is a bad representation of what Parliament would look like. I think that it would actually intensify transparency and accountability, which is something that a lot of South Africans have been pleading for.
Yeah, and it certainly will get easier to crunch the numbers this evening when the IEC does announce those results, and then we're able to see what seat allocations could possibly look like. Well,